is not that scientific, I would think that that would say, yeah, somebody loved us enough to make us even so unique, and each of us has our own DNA.
Yes. I think where the scientists are coming from is there's also similarities in DNA between humans, say, and other primates, apes and monkeys and things like that. And it's the similarities, again, that idea of homology. But again, I think the principle is that homology alone, similarities, don't really differentiate between was it a result of evolution or was it a result of an act of creation or intelligent design. So homology, we need something more than homology to prove this kind of theory.
Right, and I know you're going to talk about the missing link a little bit later.
Yes.
Because there, even though they find this similarity, there's never really been this link between us and whatever primates. And so go ahead. You were getting ready to share your next point. And I don't know if you were going to talk about the fossil record that's out there, or did you have another point that you wanted to bring up?
Well, I think you asked the question about what do we need really to
prove evolution. Yeah.
And I think that probably we need at least two things.
Okay.
Since homology doesn't do it for us, similar structures, we need a clear engine or a clear mechanism that can bring about these changes. We talked about mutations and the question about whether or not that can explain these changes. And the other is we need evidence that this happened. We need all those transitional forms or missing links to see that evidence that this engine, if you will, even if it was powerful enough, did it actually produce the evidence that there were all these gradual, subtle changes that Darwin proposed that natural selection picked as favorable and allowed then construction of new structures and species.
Okay.
So I think that's what's needed here. And Carl Sagan, the late TV science man that was an evolutionist, said that basically human beings are a result of happy accidents.
Okay.
So you asked me.
Yes.
About mutations.
About mutations.
Yeah, mutations. Well, scientists have a way of studying mutations. And the question is, what do you pick if you're going to study something? Well, you wouldn't want to pick a human being. That would be unethical.
Sure.
So the poor fruit fly was one of those that was chosen to be studied. And the fruit fly is advantageous in certain ways. It only lives 10 days. So you can have a lot of generations of fruit flies in a fairly short period of time. Number two is that it's not very costly. You know, a few milk bottles and a few bananas and you can raise these fruit flies in huge numbers.
And totally ethical, right?
Totally ethical, as far as I'm concerned. Number three is that they only have 4 chromosomes. So they're a little simpler kind of organism to study. So now scientists have been able for quite a long time to bombard these fruit flies with radiation or chemicals and produce mutations. And in that process, they've been able to increase the normal mutation rate. The body generally is very good at replication. It's very precise. It tends to be very careful in its reproduction, not make many mistakes. But occasionally these happen. And it's able to increase the mutation rate that we'd see in nature by 15,000%. And over the years, scientists have been able to make more than 400 mutations. But none of these have ever created a new species. They've all been fruit flies.
Okay.
And all of them have been actually detrimental. Either they've caused the shortening of the lifespan, the viability of the fruit fly, or they've not been as able to reproduce. The picture that's seen a lot of times in evolutionary textbooks is a picture of a 4-winged fruit fly. Fruit flies usually have 2 wings. But by mutation, actually they were able to produce a fruit fly with 4 wings, 2 pairs. And this was hailed as a great step and great evidence for the evolutionary process. Well, there are a couple problems with that. One is that they're really not making any new structures. It was just kind of a duplication of a pair of wings that already was present on the fruit fly. And interestingly, in the true nature of mutations, it wasn't really advantageous. It really lacked any flight wings, or I'm sorry, flight muscles.
Okay.
So the wings really didn't work.
Have a purpose.
They were just kind of
hanging there,
dragging, and made it hard for these fruit flies to reproduce and even to survive. This is sometimes used in the textbooks as evidence for positive structures being made by evolution. But really, I believe it says just the opposite. So in many experiments like this, it's interesting. There's an interesting quote by Theodosius Dobzhansky. He was one of the founders of the neo-Darwin synthesis, which simply means the updating of Darwin's evolution. Updating by the new genetic information we have.
Okay.
And he said the process of mutation is the only known source of new materials, of genetic variability and hence evolution. And he admitted that mutations are, for all practical purposes, always deleterious. They cause disease and monstrosities. And that it would seem unlikely that they would be the building blocks for new structures and new species. And yet he says in his book, Mankind Evolving, he said that this is not inconsistent with the recognition that useful mutations did occur in the evolutionary line which produced man. For otherwise, obviously, mankind would not be here. So basically he's saying man evolved, so mutations must have somehow worked. So instead of looking for the evidence to prove that man evolved, he starts with the fact, if you will, that man has evolved, and the only engine for change is mutation. And so obviously that happened.
Okay.
So.
Well, we have about 10 minutes left.
Oh, my word.
Yes. So I'm hoping that we can wrap this up in a way that we're able to bring some closure to it. And then if we really miss something that's really important, we're going to get it on our next program. But I think the next part goes into the fossil record and the missing link. And so can you talk about that?
Yes, I think that even if you had a mechanism for change that could produce evolution, you need to see some evidence that it actually occurred. And Darwin was very aware of this. And he realized that these many transitional forms that are needed for his theory to be true were not in the fossil record. 2 years later, after his Origin of Species in 1859, a fossil was found. It was in Germany in a limestone quarry, and it was a fossil of an ancient bird. And this was a very interesting fossil in that it had teeth, and it had kind of like a lizard-like tail and some claws on the wings. And it was called Archaeopteryx, which means ancient wing. And it was hailed as the missing link between reptiles and birds. And many people felt like this was the ultimate icon of fossils for evolution. And even up to 1982, Ernst Mayr, another, like Dobzhansky, a founder of the neo-Darwin synthesis, hailed it as the missing link, the most beautiful fossil that's ever been found. Well, scientists now feel like this is not the missing link. It was just an ancient bird, so it really doesn't have that place. There was a finding in 1999 where a fossil, an amateur fossil gatherer, purchased a fossil, if you will, for $80,000 in Arizona Mineral Show, and it had some features that appeared to be both dinosaur and bird, and he called that Archaeoraptor. And it was looked at in National Geographic, which is very pro-evolution. I wrote this down. This is kind of interesting. The author in National Geographic said, "We can now say that birds are dinosaurs, just as confidently as we can say that humans are mammals." But it turned out to be a forgery. This fossil came out of China, and the fossils are worth a lot of money. It was smuggled out, and actually somebody had glued two different fossils together to make it look like dinosaur and bird.
So what did National Geographic do? Did they retract their statement, or?
They did in kind of the back part of the magazine. It was a very embarrassing moment for National Geographic.
Sure. So with
but-
all these apparent weaknesses in evolution, how do evolutionists respond to this? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because we have about 5 minutes, and I want to...
Boy, how time goes quickly.
Yes, it sure does. This is a really interesting topic.
We didn't even get into the Cambrian explosion or
well,
the human missing links. And
maybe
all
we
that.
could talk a little bit about that on the next program.
Yeah.
But
I think the responses of evolutionists are kind of interesting, and that is basically they say something to the effect that these difficulties are probably just apparent because we know that evolution has occurred. So somehow the improbability, somehow the difficulties will be worked out. Give us a little more time, and we'll be able to explain these kind of mechanisms. So time is always an explanation here. We'll be a little smarter 10 years down the road. So their faith is in the evolutionary process, and they expect it to be proven down the line.
okay. So could you summarize just in a few words?
Oh my!
The topic that we
Yes.
I know you probably need. Well, you did 4 weeks in our church, and
Yes.
And there were still questions, and it's a fascinating topic. But we
Yes.
have an hour to sort of whet people's palates, and they can certainly contact us and have you come and speak in their church or in their
Yes.
groups or in their schools, wherever. So can you kind of summarize for us?
Yes. You know, I think nobody was there when life was first made. So whether it's evolution or creation, it requires a faith. And I think the main point is faith is based on reasonable evidence. And what does the evidence most point towards? And we didn't even get a chance to go into some other parts of the fossil record and the difficulties there, or the formation of the first cell out of chemicals. That's, I guess we probably need another 20, 30 minutes just to kind of superficially cover that. But I think when you look at those, the evidence to me is much more reasonable as far as being in favor of an intelligent designer,
Yes.
a creator. Either evolution or creation requires faith, and I think it's a much more reasonable faith
Yes.
to believe in the God of the Bible.
Yes, I definitely concur. I remember someone saying that if you saw a watch sitting on a tree stump somewhere and you picked it up, what would you think? Did it just get there, or did somebody create it or design it? And we would all logically say, well, of course, someone put that together. And so think of the human being and how complex and amazing it is. And we just sort of came out, we were some cosmic accident that just doesn't work for me.
Actually, maybe we can talk about that in our next session.
Yes.
When we talk about the evidence for intelligent design. We've talked about the evidence of evolution. We'll talk about the evidence for intelligent design, or the evidence for a creator.
Well, I hope that that whets your palate, and that you're still curious, and that you'll tune in for the second part of the program. God loves you with an everlasting love. He created you. He formed you while you were in your mother's womb, and He has a plan for your life. God bless you.